As the U.S. promises to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age, what price will civilians pay? With millions displaced and thousands killed, the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran will continue for at least weeks to come. Vital infrastructure has been destroyed, and people in need of aid around the world are suffering for it. But is the humanitarian cost of the war being ignored? I'm Andrea Sankey, and this is the Newsmakers. At a cost so far of hundreds of billions of dollars, at a time when life-saving aid is being slashed around the world, the war on Iran has many questioning humanity itself. While President Trump boasts the superiority of the U.S. military, much less has been said about the countless homes, lives, and infrastructure being destroyed. And that's not just in Iran. Israel's assaults on Lebanon, Gaza, and the West Bank continue, while aid agencies warn the destruction of civilian infrastructure and the incapacity to rebuild it will cause suffering for years to come. Even aid workers as far afield as Africa and Southeast Asia complain more innocent lives are being lost every day, while money is being funneled toward weapons rather than food and medicine. Here's a look.
Yet another missile lays waste to Iran's capital. These scenes are playing out across the country as the US-Israeli strikes hit residential areas, schools and health facilities, as well as military infrastructure. The Iranian Red Crescent says 115,000 civilian sites have been damaged since the war began. The death toll has passed 2,000, including hundreds of women and children. More than 3.2 million people have been forced to flee their homes. Despite the relentless attacks, thousands of Iranians have rallied in support of the regime in its fight against the aggression. On Tuesday, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian and Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi also joined the crowds marking Islamic Republic Day.
One really feels admiration for these people who, with so much motivation, enthusiasm, and a very high spirit, do such things for their country. They sacrifice, protect, and persevere. They preserve social cohesion.
But that show of unity masks a different suffering. Since the mass killing of anti-government protesters in January, Iran has now begun executing people accused of involvement. 3 people alleged to have killed police officers during the protests have been hanged, and it's feared there could be many more to come. Since the war began, the authorities have arrested more than 2,300 people on charges related to national security.
As if the pain and suffering brought on by the war is not enough, some Iranians are being arbitrarily rounded up, jailed, prosecuted without due process, and in some cases then even executed by their own government. The human rights of the Iranian people must be the top priority.
At the height of the January protests, US President Donald Trump told the Iranians that help is on the way and deployed a US armada to the region. Just weeks later, those military assets have hit the same Iranians. Recently, when asked by a Fox News host about how Iranians are faring, Trump gave an unexpected response.
It's upsetting.
I do. But first, you remember when we had lunch years ago in the base of Trump Tower when it was a brand new building?
It was a long time ago, yes.
A long time ago. And you haven't changed.
Oh.
You have not changed. Now, I'm not allowed to say this. It's the end of my political career. But you may be even better looking, okay? So I don't know what you're doing.
And on Wednesday, he said the attacks on Iran will intensify.
We're going to hit them extremely hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We're going to bring them back to the Stone Ages where they belong.
Meanwhile, in Lebanon, Israeli attacks have killed more than 1,200 people and displaced over 1 million. Yet the war's devastating impacts reach beyond. A recent UNDP report says the conflict could cost Arab nations up to $194 billion and push 4 million people into poverty. And the International Rescue Committee warns that the oil crisis and supply chain disruptions are threatening life-saving operations across Africa. President Trump says the US is nearing a victory in Iran, but millions around the globe are drawing closer to a humanitarian crisis.
Let's get some perspective now from inside Iran. And joining me from the capital, Iranian affairs analyst Seyed Khoshcheshm. Thank you so much for being with me. So you now have the United States threatening to bomb Iran back to the Stone Age over the coming weeks. I know you believe the regime will survive this, but explain what the Iranian people have been dealing with and what they'll face with more airstrikes now.
Hello, and thanks for having me. Well, it's interesting to note because they've been under bombardment for 5 weeks now. They are losing homes, family members, their loved ones, but still they continue supporting the country and the Islamic Republic. There have been many footages showing that people who have lost their home immediately after seeing that their houses have been devastated and remains in ruins, they say, okay, that's a pain, but we are not going to stop resistance because we do not want to lose our greater home, that's the country, Iran, and we continue supporting the military forces in the Islamic Republic.
Okay.
In this war, they have done, savagery, complete savagery. Some 115,000 plus civilian units, houses and centers have been damaged, including around 92,000 homes, people's homes, tens of medical centers in the hospitals, tens of ambulances, tens of aid workers have been martyred. Just a couple of days ago, they bombed 2 universities, the one in Tehran, another one in Isfahan. On the same day, they bombed an orphanage, an orphan's house in Karaj, and killing 2, injuring 5 others. So, in addition to so many other, wild attacks that they've been doing, including around my house, in a distance of 100 to 200 yards. They have bombed 3-4 places, at least 4 places. The closest one was 50 yards away from my house.
Okay.
And they continue bombing homes and residential areas. Just today, they bombed one of the greatest, or maybe the highest bridge in the Middle East. It was a bypass of Karaj from Karaj to north of Iran, and they demolished a part of that bridge.
Right.
They have been attacking steel factories, infrastructures, and they've started that.
Yeah, I know Iran's biggest steel plant has actually been taken
invite.
offline now, which will cost the population as well, not just in terms of the infrastructure that's lost, but the jobs that it supplied. Let me ask you this, though, because as you said, that throughout all this, you feel that the population continues to support the regime. I think it's fair to say some do, but some don't. So do you fear that once the dust settles, that a part of the public, as you are aware, who had already taken to the streets in massive protests really before this war, will become even more frustrated?
No, because the last time the rioting started, they were motivated, they were provoked by the opposition TVs run by Israel and the United States and Britain, and now they have come to realize the reality. One of these TVs that works for Mossad, they were encouraging attacks on Iran, claiming that after the war, the Islamic Republic will be toppled. Just today, a few hours ago, I saw them making a mockery of Donald Trump when he said that the regime in Tehran has changed, quote unquote, and they were making a mockery of his achievements. They are this about this. This is the opposition. On the contrary, the Iranian people, that part of the society that were out rioting or protesting a few months ago, they've come to face the reality, what it means to the United States and Israel when Donald Trump says, I come to you to help you. His help is devastating power plants, killing people, not selectively, actually, altogether.
Okay. Do you think though the government
destroy buildings?
stance that it's rallying support now around this common enemy, even in the midst of those who had you're saying previously protested against it. Do you think it's helpful, though, that the government is now proceeding with even death penalty cases and executions of convicted protesters, as well as thousands of arrests at this time? People have been suffering a lot and living in enough fear. Could that
Iran
backfire badly on the government?
No. Iran has not executed any protester, but like many other countries, it has issued death sentences for terrorists, like the ones that were executed a few days ago. They had conducted terrorist attacks fired at military bases inside the country recently. And to the contrary, as I was telling you, this war has consolidated the population and brought them to rally around the government, like the last time there was a war in Iran 10 months ago. But even stronger than that, that time the whole country, the people stood united against the Israeli-American attacks. But this time, they have come out. Just take a look at the appearance and the code of dressing. Of those people that come out, you will see that there are many of them. Even many of them say that they were part of the rioting or the protests a few months ago, but now they have come to realize the reality and joined forces with the Islamic Republic to stand against the United States and Israel.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. I'd really like to thank you so much for taking the time to be a part of this segment of the Newsmakers. Thanks again. Let's broaden out the discussion now and welcome three new panelists. Joining me from London, Associate Fellow with Chatham House's MENA program, Zizet Darkazali. From Boston, Public Policy Fellow at American University of Beirut, Rami Khouri. And from Washington, CEO of Gulf State Analytics, Giorgio Cafiero. Thanks all so much for being with me. Zizet, I'll start with you. We have to look at the humanitarian angle here, and we've had agencies like the NRC remind us that, the destruction of civilian infrastructure actually just robs electricity, water, healthcare, and heating from millions of people who already face extreme hardship. So that's what's happening really across Iran right now and other parts of, the Gulf, the territories. So does that potentially leave, I'm asking this in the case of the Iranian people, does it leave them poorer and less powerful now against an oppressive government in the long term, which is exactly what the U.S. said it didn't want?
Thank you, Andrea. Good to be with you. Look, as your report said earlier, civilians always end up paying the highest price in armed conflicts. We've seen that in Gaza, we've seen that in Ukraine, we've seen that in Sudan, and now we're seeing it in Iran and the region as well that are also impacted by what's happening. Look, humanitarian effects occur on more than one level. It's not just a direct impact in terms of people killed and life injuries and trauma and destruction of infrastructure. It also has wider implications like the indirect impact that's caused by the global economy, interruption of the shipping lanes, which will all affect access of any humanitarian aid in the future once the war is over. As for your specific question on Iranian people on the ground, so your previous speaker said that the people in Iran are rallying around the flag and are supporting the regime. Well, there's a blackout in terms of communication with Iran, and there are so many voices that aren't really reaching the media. Some narratives are amplified by certain parties. But there are also, we hear that there are also people there that, even if they're not liking the regime, they hate to see their country being destroyed by the US and by Israel, and a new reality imposed on them. And that will take a long time to recover from and to come to terms with. The end of the war isn't going to be only, it's not going to impact only the people with relationship with the regime. It's going to impact the people's relationship with each other as well. The conflict in Iran has also impacted the different communities within the country. So there has to be also reconciliation that would need to be done within the different segments of the people inside Iran. That's in addition to the challenges of getting supplies inside the country to fix what has been destroyed, whether to infrastructure and to the people themselves.
Right. Rami, speak to the Iranian people as well, if you can. And the question I put forth is what this could actually mean for the long term. I mean, the United States had said initially that they wanted to see the Iranian people rise up. Well, in the context of a war, that becomes, almost impossible unless you're rallying in favor of the government. And now that their infrastructure has been bombed into oblivion, they're even less powerful, less able to rise up the way the U.S. had said part of its intention was in declaring this war.
Yeah, I think the American idea of the Iranians rising up and overthrowing their regime after Israel and the U.S. bombed them is typical imperial fantasy, but it's done over and over and over again. And this is how the imperial and colonial systems work. It's ironic that there are probably a bigger percentage of Iranians today support what their government is doing to try to protect the country from the American-Israeli assault than the number of Americans who support what Trump is doing. I mean, it's quite an irony that Trump only gets around 30% support of his people. The other point I'd make, bigger, more important point, is that you have to separate the reaction of ordinary people during a wartime when they're being attacked and their fundamental human survival systems, electricity, energy, other schools, hospitals are being destroyed. They're going to support their government as it tries to protect them. The third, more important point I'd make is that the tradition that we've seen in the British, French, and American imperial periods in the last 100 years in the region, and the Israeli actions in Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, and Iran and elsewhere are identical. They don't see the local people. They don't exist. The whole idea of Balfour was that when England gave Palestine to the Zionist movement, that there was no Palestinian Arabs. Of course, they made up 93% of the population. The Americans in Iran don't see any ordinary Iranians. They don't exist in their calculations. They don't matter. So this is, again, it's a structural problem with colonial barbarism.
Rami, I'm going to stick with you because I also wanted to get to the context of Lebanon here. The same humanitarian aid organization, NRC, says the humanitarian needs of families affected by the current escalation in Lebanon could be met with the spending on just 8 hours of this conflict. So now you have another country that was already facing a massive economic crisis being plunged further into poverty, seeing more infrastructure destroyed, basic services now being denied, families sleeping in tents in the street that used to have homes in south of Beirut. Where does that leave the psyche of those people going forward, in that a bigger enemy could be created for Israel in its efforts to eliminate the enemy that's there, it says?
This is precisely the trajectory of public opinion and national sentiment across most of the Levant, Western Asia, in most of the last 60, 70 years since the creation of Israel. That when they're bombed and occupied and ravaged, and dehumanized by Israeli actions supported by the US or England or France or Germany, they react as they're doing now. They try to survive, first of all. They try to support resistance whenever they can. And resistance isn't only military. They keep sending their kids to school. They keep creating poetry. They keep creating dance and music. And this is a humanity that affirms itself when the Israeli and American effort is to dehumanize them and take away their humanity. So this has constantly happened since the 1940s, that these Western and Israeli and Western assaults only strengthen the will of the local people, first to survive and then to resist in any way they can. We're seeing for the first time ever, just one last quick point, what's historic now is for the first time ever, we've seen the Iran and Hezbollah and the Ansarullah and Hamas and others effectively able to somehow check to a certain extent this Zionist Israeli Western assault and force it into some kind of negotiations.
Okay. Let me turn to Giorgio. Giorgio, I really actually need to ask you as well about the commercial infrastructure that's been destroyed here in Iran, across the Gulf, everything from Qatar's LNG production facility, which is now offline, to airports being hit. What is that costing people in the region and around the world in monetary terms? You know, when global inflation and the cost of living is already a massive issue in most of these places. Now we're facing the greater loss of jobs, not just in the immediate term, but potentially for the long term.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the program. You know, I think when we're looking at everything that's happened in the GCC states since February 28th, it's quite clear that Iran's strategy for responding to the American-Israeli war that began late February was to try to disrupt the global economy as much as possible. This was Iran's strategy for making the United States pay a very, very high cost with the aim of reestablishing deterrence so that the United States would never consider attacking Iran again. Obviously, these attacks that have hit civilian sites must be condemned from a moral standpoint, absolutely. But we should also recognize that this strategy has been very effective by hitting airports, maritime ports, energy facilities, hotels. It's very clear that Iran has been able to disrupt the economies in the GCC, severely harming U.S. interests and creating huge disruptions to the global economy. Even if tomorrow there's a cessation of hostilities, it will take considerable period of time for the global economy to recover. But there's no doubt that the longer this war rages on, the costs are only going to increase. There are so many external costs that we have yet to even realize. Obviously, many people are talking about what's happening with energy markets, given the de facto closure of the Strait of Hormuz. But something people have paid less attention to is what's going on with the exports of fertilizer to countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, other countries that really depend on fertilizers from the Gulf countries and other resources too. The economic impact, to put it mildly, has been very, very severe for countries in the global south and also in the global north.
Yeah, let me ask Suzette then finally. I mean, Giorgio sees this damage being done economically for the significant future. We might even face lower agricultural yields, meaning people won't be able to get food in many countries of the world. So what do you see as the significant time, even if this stops within the 2 weeks that Donald Trump has said? How long will the world need to recover and hopefully avoid the kind of social discontent from further economic strain that can plunge the global community further into disarray and even conflict?
Absolutely. Look, the situation is very grim. The picture is very, very bleak. With the ongoing humanitarian crises in the region and elsewhere, humanitarian organizations are overwhelmed, overstretched, and underfunded. And so the systematic violation of international law as well creates a very conducive, also global environment for not prioritizing humanitarian needs. So, and the fact that also the impact and the implications of this war, which go beyond also food insecurity and again, the death toll and the destruction, the recovery is a very long time. And not everything, unfortunately, can be also recovered. So shipping lanes, flights are disrupted. Humanitarian organizations are not able to access and bring supplies to needed places. So I think with all of that, it is unlikely that we will see any improvement on recovery or any speedy recovery, because you would need access, you would need to provide safety, and you would need funds. And with what happened, actors have shifted their priorities in terms of funding. I don't see the traditional donors that give to humanitarian funding now prioritizing human aid over their own problems that have been as a result of this war.
Absolutely. And very quickly, Rami, final minute. I mean, where do you see that leading the world as far as, social fracturing is concerned? Will we see more conflict because of what's being created via this conflict today and the global economic disaster it can cause?
Well, we're seeing a really rapid and deep widening of the stresses that individual families, entire societies, and entire continents are feeling, whether it's in fertilizer or rare chemicals or whatever. Every dimension of life is being impacted by the limited movement through the Straits of Hormuz. So people will feel this in so many ways besides just raising the price of gas. But there's a critical point here which the Israelis and the Americans don't understand. Iran, along with the Indus Valley, probably has the longest stretch of human civilization anywhere on Earth, about 5,000 years of settled human life in these regions. These are societies whose collective psyche and memory is profound, and it includes massive suffering, and it includes massive suffering caused by foreign intervention, whether it's Russian, British, American, Israeli, Iraqi during the war. But different people have intervened in Iran for a long time, and they deal with it. They're used to it. It's not pleasant. They suffer. They pay a high price. The Palestinians and Lebanese now paying an enormous price. But this is part of being a historical society that is finally starting to understand how to try to resist the onslaught. And this is, I think, the equation we have to look at.
Okay. Giorgio, my apologies. I'm so sorry I can't give you a final word. We are completely out of time, unfortunately, for this edition of the Newsmakers. So I'd like to thank all three of you sincerely so much for being with me, our viewers for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on social media, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. I'll see you next time.